Hi everybody, it's Jay and I'm back again with another video sneak peek preview for you. It's the special weekend series that we've been doing called New Releases You Might Have Missed. For anyone who's not familiar, when we launched Stay with Jay 2.5 months ago, most of the audiobooks we had at launch were previously released titles, but we had a handful of titles that were new releases, had never been seen or heard anywhere else. Now, because of the hubbub of starting a new channel, they didn't get their own individual promotion like we like to do with our new releases now. And we're taking care of that right now. One thing to remember about these special titles is that you don't have to wait a week from the preview to listen to the full audiobook. They're all available in our library right now. And if you wait until the end of this video, we even have a convenient link to take you right there. Okay, so today is the fourth and final entry into our series, and it's about The Cowboy's Second Chance. The Cowboy's Second Chance is kind of unique for a Jessie novel in that it doesn't really belong to any one series. Yes, it shares very strong connective tissue with the Sweetwater Ranch Western Cowboy Romance series and, to a degree, the Coming Home to North Dakota series because those both take place in Sweetwater, North Dakota. But it's not really a sequel to the Sweetwater Ranch series. It's not really a prequel, but it is based on a lot of the events from those books and helps fill in a lot of the story as well. It's kind of unique in that. And it's also its own wonderful, sweet romance as well. It stands alone just fine. It's the story of Mrs. Bonnie Stryker, who you might recognize from the Sweetwater Ranch series. She made several appearances there herself, and she's the mother of several of the heroes in those books. And Howard Edwards, who was a resident of Sweetwater who left to find his way in the world and now realizes it's time to come home. I don't want to spoil too much more of the story than that, so let's all take a listen to the very first chapter of that book, and when you're done, you can go listen to the full thing here on Stay with Jay. Mrs. Bonnie Stryker clicked send, then closed her laptop with a small cramp in her stomach. What had started out years ago as an acquaintance of a friend helping her fix her laptop had turned into an odd friendship of its own. She pushed back away from her desk. Oil man. That's all she knew him as. Of course, he only knew her as Stryker Mom. She deliberately misspelled her last name to keep anyone from tracing her. She supposed he was some kind of tech dude from somewhere out east. A city guy for sure. A nice man. He knew she lived in North Dakota, but it was a big state, and she'd never told him where. Plus, she was almost 50 and had 8 kids. She felt pretty safe from any kind of romantic interest since he knew about her kids from the beginning. 8 kids would almost certainly scare most men completely off. Oil Man had not gotten romantic at all, but he'd still offered her friendship. A slow, years-long building that hadn't scared her away, like it might have if he'd been too pushy. Not that she worried. There weren't too many men who would look at her, a matronly-figured grandmother, and think romance. "Hey, Mom, I'm off to orchestra practice." Charlie, her youngest child, the one she'd been pregnant with when her husband died, called from the back door. "Okay, sweetie, be careful," she said, getting up from her chair and grabbing her phone. "If you wait to feed until I get back, I'll help you," Charlie said from the doorway. "I'll have the feeding done and supper on the table." She walked from the living room to the kitchen doorway where she could see her daughter, all grown up, a senior this year, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, boots and a beanie cap. North Dakota in April was dependable. It would be unpredictable. You could bank on it. Bonnie's phone buzzed in her hand, but she didn't look at it. Rather, she shoved down the burst of nerves that tried to set fire to her stomach. "Mom, I'll help. You just have to wait." "We'll see." She didn't want to argue about it. Also, her phone was almost burning a hole in her hand. Would he have answered her that fast? Charlie lifted her brows, knowing that "we'll see" was her mother's way of ending the argument and intending to do her own thing. Sometimes parents just had to do things for survival, particularly single moms. The door clicked closed as Charlie left. Bonnie allowed the silence of the kitchen to soak into her, closing her eyes and breathing deeply of the familiar scent of her home. Coffee mixed with vanilla and cinnamon, and the fresh air farm smell that all her children had been raised on. It hadn't been easy, but Charlie was just a few days away from graduating from high school. Bonnie wasn't under the delusion that her work would be done when Charlie graduated. She was simply entering another chapter of her life. It was tempting to think about how different things would be if her husband were still alive. But looking back never fixed anything, and it just depressed her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, reminding her of why her stomach cramped and her heart thundered. Faintly, the sound of gravel crunching and a motor fading told her that Charlie had pulled out of the drive and was gone. She was alone. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the phone out of her pocket. She didn't look at it. Not yet. Did she really want to know what it said? What he said. Oil man. He'd asked to meet her. She told him she wanted to know his name first. How could she contemplate meeting someone when she didn't even know their name? She suspected the buzzing of her phone was his answer. It stood to reason if he wanted to meet her, he'd be willing to tell her his name. But of course, if he told her his name, she'd have to cough up hers. Throughout all the years of raising children, the craziness of ranching, the hardscrabble life, the uncertainty of beef prices and corn prices and emergency room visits, middle-of-the-night doctor visits, children that fought, and one child that left and she didn't even know where he was. All of that. Throughout it all, he'd been the constant in her life. Not as a person. She'd never met him. But his emails were consistent, his support unwavering. Not romantic. She'd talked about her day or week, her life, and he answered, talking about his own life as well. He'd been someone she'd been able to unburden on. He'd given her good advice, and then he talked and listened and she gave her own advice right back to him. Did she want that relationship to change? She'd been happy with the way it was. Their current one offered no stress, an online friendship with someone she couldn't see but was comfortable with. Did she want to know him? As a real, live person? Part of her did. Part of her had always wanted more. But it had been decades. Why would he want to meet now? She supposed it was possible he wanted to meet his friends, but it was also possible, probable maybe, that he wanted more. She wasn't sure about what she wanted. All kinds of possibilities raced through her mind. He could be 30 years older than her and in a nursing home. She didn't know. Or he could be younger. Did she want to take a chance on someone younger? Maybe she should find these things out before they agreed to meet. She'd never asked his age or for a picture. He certainly hadn't mentioned it either. But it seemed shallow to want to know what he looked like, or how old he was, or even how much money he had. those things shouldn't matter. But she'd been an adult long enough to know that one couldn't live on love, and that some things really did matter. But how did one ask a person whether they were a registered sex offender? She wasn't sure she wanted to go through all the stress and strain of thinking about it. She was happy the way she was. She didn't need a man in her life, especially now that her children were grown and raised. Being single definitely had its perks. Her fingers tightened around her phone. When he'd suggested they meet, everything changed, whether she wanted it to or not. To think anything different was to be in denial. She raised her phone, turning it so the screen faced her. It blinked on. 2 email notifications. One from her sister in Nevada, and one from Oil Man. She swiped and clicked, taking a breath and sinking into a kitchen chair. There was no salutation.
My name is Howard Edwards. I own several businesses here on the East Coast. You can Google me, but there shouldn't be much that comes up, as I have specifically requested to be a silent partner in all my endeavors. I could give you a lot more personal information about myself, information that we haven't shared throughout the years. Some of it I know will not matter, and some of it I believe you will recognize. It's because of this latter information that I would like to meet you face to face as we talk about it. If 20 years of correspondence aren't enough to convince you that I'm not a serial killer or something of that nature, I certainly understand if you'd like to bring a companion with you. Again, because of that information, I hope we can meet somewhere other than Sweetwater. I promise you will understand after our meeting. Nothing bad, just personal. I thought long and hard before asking to meet you, because I've enjoyed our correspondence over the years and didn't want to destroy what I felt was a strong bond of friendship. But my desire to see you, and to possibly have something more with you, overcame my fear of losing you completely. I've also had some recent events in my life that have made it possible for me to be free to make this request of you. If you decide that you'd rather keep our relationship where it's been for the last 20 years, I completely understand, and I'm willing to respect that. Maybe meeting won't change anything. Maybe you'll decide we'd be happier continuing our correspondence. But I'm not going to pretend that I'm not hoping for something more. With admiration, Mr. Edwards.
Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.